And now our speaker for this evening is one who will be very familiar to you all. I realise I'm also so familiar to you all that I forgot to introduce myself at the start of this. I'm Erin, the Vice President. But I'm delighted to say that we're opening with one of our long-standing committee members, Richard Miller, who is also our treasurer, so this is also the man to which you give your subs for the new season, if you've not done so yet. But Richard is appearing in his guise as a historian of cricket this evening. And in the summer of 1879, the Circus came to Dundee, and some of the leading cricketers in the district decided that a match against the Circus's clown troupe would be good fun and an opportunity to raise funds for the Dundee Royal Infirmary. The crowds turned out, the clowns played amid much hilarity, but the plot thickens. So Richard is going to tell us about the story of the clowns' cricket match and illuminate the history of sport in Dundee and Scotland more widely. So I will hand over to Richard now and very much look forward to hearing about what happened.
Right, well, can everybody hear me? That's
yes.
the first thing. That's a bonus. Firstly, an apology. If anyone has come hoping for a ball-by-ball description of the Clowns cricket match of 1879, you're going to be sadly disappointed. To me, almost the least interesting thing about the Clowns cricket match was the actual cricket. But there is much more that you'll find out, and let's see if I can. So let's start off. The Circus came to town. Watson Circus, equestrian, Sam Watson is the proprietor. Now, unlike in the days of my youth, when Billy Smarts or Chipperfields used to come and pitch their big tent down at Riverside, Watson's Circus didn't need to do that because there were ready-made facilities for circus. There were actually two in Dundee in 1879. This one, which he didn't go to, was Cook's Royal Circus. Founded by the Cook brothers, who ran a circus from the 1840s all the way through to the 1900s. They built a self-contained circus behind the Queen's Hotel. It was a structure that could hold 4,000 people, and eventually the site, after the circus burned down in 1890, the site became the site of the People's Palace, the new People's Palace. Then it became the Palace Theatre, then it became the Palace Cinema, then it became the Theatre Royal, and I think it was owned by Callum Kennedy at one point. So that was Cook's Royal Circus. But 5 years earlier, in 1875, James Newsom built a building which was capable of staging all sorts of events. It held 3,000 people, and this is the location of it. If you imagine, it sits where the car wash is in Dock Street. Now, Newsom built buildings, circus buildings, throughout the country. They did have a tendency to burn down, because they were all tended to be of wood. But this one was 111 feet long, could hold 3,000 people. I say it was opened in 1875. It actually lasted till 1881, when it was broken up and all the wood sold, and he moved to another building down by Tay Fergus. But James Newsom was a circus proprietor himself, and he went around the country, but this building was one of his entrepreneurial efforts. So that was Newsom's buildings. Billy Ruff, when he was here talking 2 years ago, thought that Newsom's buildings was actually the Alhambra Music Hall. The Alhambra Music Hall was actually in this area here because at one point they ran a high wire from the Alhambra across the East Station and did a high wire act. So there's been some confusion in the past about nuisance buildings and the Alhambra, but the Alhambra was demolished in 1872. So we know East Dock Street is described, East Dock Street next to the gasworks. A nice attractive place to be. So that was how the circus was laid out in those times. So, next question is, you've got a circus, why would you want to have a cricket match to raise funds? Again, those of a certain age from Dundee will remember the Butchers versus the Ministers football games at Dens Park to raise funds. This is 1931, again to raise funds on behalf of the Royal Infirmary. Royal Infirmary at that time funded by donations and the likes. So that was the thing from the 30s. I was taken to Dens, I think, in the early 60s to see the Butchers versus Ministers game. But it was a cricket match because in 1879, cricket was the dominant team sport in Scotland. It was known actually as Scotland's national game in the press. And it was known as Scotland's national game all the way up until about 1893 when football was professionalised. And only after that did we start to see football taking over. The first game, this is the first game in that is known of in Dundee. Cricket is said to have started in Scotland in 1785. The Scottish Cricket Union celebrated their bicentenary in 1985, but there's no doubt that cricket was played before then. In 1742, in Savannah, Georgia, on St Andrew's Day, the governor recorded that the Scotchmen played cricket for a barrel of beer. So there's no question that cricket was known in Scotland before 1785. My theory, of course, is that cricket was played in Dundee after General Monk sacked the town, and he probably set up the 60-odd people who stayed and married into Dundee women, played cricket in the meadows. That's speculation. This is 1832. So we've got two clubs in Dundee in 1832. And it looks like the Dundee Cricket Club wasn't very good, however. And that was played on the meadows, pretty much where the McManus stands today. This is a map showing the locations of main cricket that was played up to about 1850. So we have the meadows, we've got the banks, we've got Blackness House. In front of Blackness House, they played cricket. Down at Magdalen Green, Stobbsmuir, which from memory opened about 1851, 1852, and up at the top, Fairmuir, which was in operation really from the start. There were other places where cricket was played in the meantime, including the Lunatic Asylum, which was in Albert Street. Large grounds, and it was felt that cricket was a good therapy for the people incarcerated in the Lunatic Asylum. And that's something actually that if you think, for those who know Liff, from the opening of Liff, when the Lunatic Asylum closed here and opened out at Liff, what did they do? They built a cricket ground. And there are lots of stories about the inmates wandering, either playing or wandering out and, to join in when games were going on. There was also a Dundee Cricket Club that we saw. They had a field at the Dens. So I'm presuming somewhere round about well, off Dens Road, probably not as far up as Dens Park, but somewhere in that area. So lots of cricket played. But this is the earliest image we have of cricket being played in Dundee. It'll be a familiar image to lots of you because it's been used many times in many different places. This is about 1844, I think. Railway's not built, the embankment's not done, but cricket was obviously prominent enough to feature for an artist to put it in his picture of Dundee from Magdalen Green. Cricket really took off in Scotland in the late 1820s, early 1830s. But it then went through a period of hiatus. There were very few games played from about 1837 until 1842, when Dundee Cricket Club, amongst others, was revived. It then went through a phase of exponential growth. You begin to see cricket clubs springing up all over the country, and some of them are still going. Clydesdale in Glasgow, 1848. Drumpellier, 1850. West of Scotland, a bit later in 1862. And we saw a big rise after the Factory Acts came in restricting the hours that people worked, which meant that more working people could take part in the games. Up till then, it was largely the professional classes who played, because ordinary people worked all day Saturday. When we come to just before 1870, cricket was being played in Dundee, in the main, on these 5 parks. And you've got a number of teams there. By 1879, there were over 50 clubs playing cricket in Dundee. Some of them had more than one team. And to give you an idea, in 1879, there were 5 clubs listed playing football, brackets, association rules, and 5 clubs playing football, brackets, rugby rules. Now, I know that seems a bit counterintuitive because everyone says, well, we were playing international football. We started off with international rugby, 1870, international football, 1871, so there must have been widespread football. There wasn't. And in fact, the vast majority of football clubs that were coming up in this time were the winter sections of cricket clubs. And even today, almost half of the senior football clubs in Scotland can trace their origin directly to a cricket club. I'll give you one example, St Johnstone in Perth. St Johnstone was a cricket club, and they went, what are we going to do for the winter? I know, we'll start a football team. In Dundee, Lochie Harp was a cricket club, produced a football team a bit like this in the early 1880s. So, lots of cricket being played. It is the major sport in the town and in the country, and it attracted big crowds. The problem with Dundee was we didn't have any place that you could play and charge for admission. Dundee is the only major city in Scotland that didn't attract a visit from one of the big touring English teams, the south of England with W.G. Grace, the All England team. They played in Kelso, they played in Glasgow, they played in Edinburgh, they played in Inverness, they played in Aberdeen. They played in Perth, but they couldn't play in Dundee because there was no place that they could find that would be able to take them. Why clowns cricket? From the 1860s, there were teams of clown cricketers formed to go round the country playing cricket games. Sometimes, often raising funds for good causes, but getting paid for doing it. So they would roll into town, they would set up, they would play a game, they would have their tent, they'd put on a show in the evening, they would take money, the cricket club or whatever good cause they were doing it for would take the admission and also under the patronage. And this motley crew is what it looked like. This is Harry Crest's Crown 11 of 1872. Harry Crest was Queen Victoria's favourite clown. Very famous in his day, and as you'll hear, his nephew was one of the clown cricketers who came in 1879. So, a fine looking bunch, you can imagine just what it was like. This is really the story of two people. Sam Watson, circus proprietor, and Archibald Paul, staid lawyer? No. Archibald Paul, lawyer, cricketer, writer, and so much more. So I'm going to tell you a bit about both of them, but each in their own way could be described as a showman. So Sam Watson started his own circus. Don't worry about what's on there. He brought his circus from Edinburgh in 1879 to Dundee. Now, Sam's time as a circus proprietor lasted a very short period. He was here in 1879. This was really his first season as a circus proprietor. Prior to that, he was a famous equestrian clown. He was known throughout the Western world, shall we say, as a clown. After he came to Dundee, after his summer season here, he took his circus to Barbados and the States, but it wasn't really a success. He came back to Britain in the early 1880s, became bankrupt, got married, went back into the circus as an equestrian, married one of the cooks of Cook's Royal Circus, came to Dundee in 1889 and was promptly arrested for bigamy because he'd been married in 1876 and his wife was still alive. So, lifted in 1889, 3 or 4 months later, we discovered that the charge of bigamy was withdrawn. Now, how he managed it, don't know, because as far as I can tell, his wife was still alive, but maybe she decided that she was better off shot at him. So, after that, Sam decides that the best thing to do is hightail it back to America. So he joins Barnum and Bailey's Circus, and he reinvents himself. And as he said himself, I took a year off to train the animals and reinvent himself as a performer with his children's circus. And the man who educates the lower animals. And as I said, he was now earning $600 a week. And he wasn't having to break his back doing horse riding. So, very successful at that. This is 1913, special for children, Sam Watson's Farmyard Circus. And then he went into vaudeville, and at the Majestic, this is in Ohio, Sam Watson, oldest comedian in vaudeville, hale and hearty at 73 as anyone at 33. That's 1917, 1919, he dies. So that is Samuel Watson. We then come to Archibald Paul, who, as I said, is a showman in his own form. Born in Fintry, but it's Fintry in Stirlingshire, in 1828, comes to Dundee round about 1850 as a young man and sets up, well, goes into business in the law. But we do find him in 1851 as a committee member of the Dundee Cricket Club. So, we don't know I've got no trace of him playing cricket before coming to Dundee, but certainly, almost as soon as he came to Dundee, he's in the cricket club, on the committee, and taking an interest. Foxmall, the Earl of Dalhousie, is responsible, to an extent, for Archibald Paul's fame. In 1864, the famous Brechin bathing case came up. Now, if you've never heard of the Brechin bathing case, go and look it up. It is a wonderful. Foxmall, Brechin Castle. In the river running past Brechin Castle, the town had created a pond to build up the water so that it could then drive the mills a bit further down the stream. This was a place where lots of people went to bathe. Foxmall didn't like the idea of people bathing at the bottom of his garden. So in 1864, he decided he would put his bailiffs, having tried to dissuade people from bathing by throwing broken glass in the pond and stones and pelting them with the stones, he decided, had enough of this, he put his bailiffs on the shore waiting with the police for people to come along. And 5 teenagers came along to do skinny dipping in the pond, to learn to swim, as they said. As they're waiting to jump in, the police jump out, arrest the lot. They're taken to the sheriff court in Forfar, where they're all convicted of indecency. Indecent exposure. 3 of them, who were what you might call the middle class, they were clerks and apprentices, and one was going to be a teacher, they were admonished, but with a conviction. The 2 working class boys were fined 40 shillings, £2, or 7 days in the jail. One of the boys' parents was able to pay the fine, the other one was stuck in Forfar jail. Archibald Paul found out about this, and he had a whip round of the Dundee lawyers, a shilling apiece, enough to pay the fine. Went to Forfar to pay the fine. The young lad had actually managed to get out that morning because some of his other people had gone. But Archibald Paul thought, this is not fair. So he decided he would appeal the sheriff's verdict to the Circuit Court, which he did successfully. The Circuit Court said, there is no public indecency with this. For indecent exposure, you have to be attempting to alarm the leeches. And it was quite an important ruling, because this was something that was obviously quite common at the time. So if everyone who went skinny dipping was done for indecency, the courts would be full. So Circuit Court overturned the verdict, criticised the sheriff, returned the fines, and wiped the convictions, but also awarded costs against the Earl. Earl wasn't having that, so he took it to the High Court, the Court of Session. He took it to the Court of Session. Court of Session found exactly the same as the Circuit Court, found against the Earl, and said the only way you can stop these people bathing in that pond is if you get interdict against them. So, needless to say, he went for interdict. That's what Paul says. We're not having that. Back to court. The Earl decided that he would cut his losses at that point, and so skinny dipping at Brechin was now allowed. The working men of Brechin were so enamoured of the work that Archibald Paul had put in that they presented him and his partner Thane with gold-topped walking sticks as a token of their esteem. And long after Archibald Paul's death, when his son was Dean of Guild, he was proud to say he still had the walking stick that had been presented to his father. So that made Archibald Paul's name as a lawyer. But what kind of lawyer was he? If I say he was the 1860s, 70s equivalent of Billy Boyle, would that be, Archibald Paul would take any case. He would often give his time free. He would go to the police courts, and if somebody didn't have representation, hopeless case or not, he would represent them free of charge. Not sure that Billy ever did that, but you know, if you wanted somebody to fight for you, Billy Boyle was your man. He was also very good at arguing his case, and he always did it, particularly in front of juries, with humour. He wrote this book, Random Writings. He actually wrote 2 books, because he contributed frequently to the Advertiser and the Evening Telegraph, with stories of his court days and other things, all humorous and interesting, all with a moral point to show. So, quite a man, Archibald Paul. One of the cases was known as the cock and hen case. So, a man's in the police court, is accused of stealing a cock and a hen. Archibald Paul objects to the indictment. It's not specific. Was it a pheasant cock and hen? Was it a sparrow cock and hen? What was it? So the judge says, yeah, I think you're right. It's not specific fiscal, so I'm going to abandon the case. So he abandons the case. The man runs out to his waiting friends and he's going to write, police lift him, take him back inside. You're charged with stealing domestic fowl, viz. A cock and hen. And although Archibald Paul tried to argue that one, he wasn't successful. But that was the kind of thing he would come up with. He always had an argument for what he wanted. So, we better get on to the cricket. Now, the cricket was played, I should say, I don't know if I did say, it's not the Clowns cricket match, because there are actually 2 Clowns cricket matches, and we'll find out why. It was played in the Baxter Park. Now, we all know it's Baxter Park, but up until the First World War, every time it appeared in the papers, it appeared as the Baxter Park. It had the definite article. Given by David, later Sir David, and Mary Ann Baxter. This is what it looked like in 1876. Very nice. 37 acres, £40,000 to buy and lay out. Laid out by Sir Joseph Paxton, who I think also did Birkenhead Park in Liverpool and, from memory, Crystal Palace. What's £40,000 in 1860 when you bought it? Roughly speaking, 40 million. Plus another £10,000 as an endowment to keep it going. So, great facility, a great place to be, Morgan Academy in the background. One of the things you don't get an impression of though today at Baxter Park, if you stand in Baxter Park, all you see is the tenements of Baxter Park Terrace, Arbroath Road, Watson Street. When this was built, there was nothing. You could stand in Baxter Park and look all the way to Fife, all the way up the river. Apart from a couple of mansions and the necropolis that I think opened in 1863, you can see all the way to Broughty Ferry and down to the castle. What a fantastic place it was. What he did specify though was, in future, there is to be no factory building close to it. This is 1882, lunatic asylum. Even in 1882, much of the land is still open. So even then, in 1879, you could still see, you could look from Baxter Park and see the bridge being built across the Tay, and then the bridge falling down over the Tay. This is Baxter Park now. Not much change. Trees are obviously nice and mature. Wasn't a great venue for cricket, but it had 2 cricket pitches, and cricket continued to be played all the way up until the Second World War, revived shortly, for a short space of time, after the Second World War, but the one thing they didn't do with the £10,000 was maintain the cricket ground. So the pitch itself was dangerous, and in the end, with the opening of Caird Park, Lochie Park opened a bit in 1891, I think, and other places opened. So, the first match. This was the first intimation that there was going to be a match. We have the Clowns Cricket Match illustrated. Now, this was the programme that was produced for the game. The agreement was the Clowns and Archibald Paul's 11 would play at Baxter Park on the 27th of September, and JP Matthew got in. If you haven't seen this, there are 2 copies, I think, in the library, and well worth a look. This is the advert page from it, so you can see all the people that he managed to sell adverts to. But at the top, Watson's Grand Cirque, the carnival on ice. Because one of the things they were able to do, remember they had horses, and they had all the sorts of things, they had the clowns, but they also put down a wooden floor and did roller skating. So they had the clowns and everybody else on roller skates. And I think that's the earliest I've seen roller skating mentioned. That's quite early in the time. These are the teams. Paul's 11, drawn really from a number of different clubs. And the clowns, well, clowns. And this is Mr. Craig from Forfar, who was the captain of Archibald Paul's team. And this is kind of what they would have looked like, or what we looked like in 2014. I suppose I should really put that on. But that's just to give you a flavour of what how it would have looked. And this is actually a fair illustration when you read the report of the games of what they look like. Scrambling about on the ground. The problem is, it was free. And I think what they hoped to do was put the blankets round and get the coins thrown in and put people around collecting. But at the time the game was due to start, there were 15,000 people in Baxter Park. Now remember, Baxter Park was surrounded by railings, so you only had the few entrance gates to get in. They all crowded in. They managed to clear an area 75 yards each side of the ground. The other thing to remember about cricket in those days is no such thing as boundaries. Every ball, if you hit a ball, you only got the number of runs you could actually run. There's no such thing as hitting it for 4. So they managed to clear an area, but more and more people arrived. The courier reckoned that by 4 o'clock, game was due to start to, they delayed it by half an hour, at 2:30. By 4 o'clock, the courier reckoned there were 30,000 people in Baxter Park. Now, given that the population of Dundee in 1881 was about 150,000, that's a fair proportion of the population of Dundee that were in here. Needless to say, as more and more people came in, the space got less and less. And in the end, they had to abandon the game with a score of 51-2. interesting thing is the way the game's treated by the two main papers, the Courier and the Advertiser. Courier, Conservative, Advertiser, Liberal. According to the Courier, there was all sorts of lawlessness, pickpocketing, disgrace. Even when Mr. Anderson was out, according to the Advertiser, he was cheered from the field by the clowns. According to the Courier, he was given the bum's rush. So, completely different way of treating it. But they decided, since it was so good, since so many people had turned up, it was obviously a success, they thought, we'll have a second game. So, put it back the following week. There you go, Watson's Great Equestrian Troupe. No day performance on the Saturday because of the match, and it's the last day that the circus is in town. So for the benefit of the Royal Infirmary, Mars and the Dundee Industrial Schools, these were the sorts of schools that, you know, John and I went to that were so good they were approved. 6 for adults, juveniles half price. This is what was known then as the Bag Park, and is now obviously Dundee Park. And they played at the far west end of the ground because that's where it was best to be done. Bag Park had been in use since the 1850s, or 1840s actually. Always disputes because the volunteers wanted to do their marching practice at the same time as the cricketers wanted to play. So it was not a great venue, but it was owned by the council and they were happy for them to charge admission. A good example again of what's likely to happen, because when a ball was hit by the clowns into the crowd where the clowns were, one of the clowns would sit on it, the fielder would approach and decide that maybe this wasn't such a good idea, and the clowns kept running. And there is another picture of the recreation, and yes, it's a handsome bunch of people, as you can see. Finally on. I would play the video, but fortunately it doesn't work. And this was the outcome of the game. The cricketers won quite easily. They reckoned that between 5,000 and 6,000 people were in the ground, and another 1,000 on Dundee Terrace watching over the railings free of charge. So far so good. 5,000, 6,000 people, 6 months ago. Roughly speaking, you would have expected that to have raised £100. £100 in 1879, not far off 100,000 today. Would have been a really good day. Now the agreement was Sam Watson would get £40 for bringing these, because he'd given up an afternoon's performance. So he would get £40, the cricketers would get the rest, to be divided amongst the different good causes. And that was fine. End of the game, said, right, we'll come and count the money. It's okay, we'll count the money, come tomorrow morning and we'll divvy it up. Saturday night, they had the last performance on the Saturday. Let's divvy it up. 2 weeks later, this appears in the Evening Telegraph. Thought this was going to be a fundraiser. Haven't heard anything about the money. Could you give us some information? And one of the team saying, Mr. Paul has good reasons for not communicating the result. And the good reason was, when they went on the Sunday morning to divvy up the spoils, Sam Watson and his troupe were nowhere to be found. They'd had a special train booked for the middle of the night and were off to Wolverhampton. Now, this is the finale. There's a lot of correspondence back and forward in the press. As when Paul publishes the letters from Sam Watson and his replies, and it goes back and forward for a couple of weeks, and in the end, Sam Watson says, well, actually, we only took £53 and 18 shillings. We've kept £40. there's your £13 you can have. And as that's what Paul said, that didn't cover the costs that they'd had to bring the boys over from the Mars for the band, the volunteers, and all the rest of the hiring of the ground. And in the end, that was how it was left. Except that Sam Watson said, oh, by the way, 24 of you came to the final night of the circus, and you're all in the stalls, so can I have 3 bob a shot, please? So if you could send me your cheque for 3 guineas, that would be it. So that was that. Nothing more was heard. In the end, I think the hospital got 12 shillings. The Mars got the same. The Dundee Industrial Schools got a set of cricket kit. And that was it. And that, really, was the end of the Dundee Clowns cricket match.